Hey folks, your OS Reviews. You're watching our retro throwback review of the HTC Cha-Cha, also known as the HTC Status in the United States. This is a unique device because it came out in 2011 and was billed as the first Facebook phone. As you can see, there's this dedicated Facebook button on the very bottom, which you can tap on once to go into your Facebook wall and post new updates as well as notifications. Otherwise, this icon will also glow whenever you're in an application that can take advantage of being posted onto Facebook, such as the camera or going to the web, if you want to share a link, things like that. So it's been optimized and it's kind of a smart Facebook key. The phone as a whole was a mid-tier device, and even today it still works fairly well despite low specs, and it's unique because of its portrait orientation, and it runs on a full version of Android 2.3.3 with a 2.6-inch capacitive touchscreen display, which is using IPS technology. But as you can see here, it shares a striking resemblance to older Blackberries with this large keypad that's easy to type on, tactile, and responsive. It makes it a great choice for messaging as well as emailing and doing some productivity, and of course, posting updates to social media. So if you're someone who needs to have a physical keyboard, this is one of the better phones I found with this keyboard built in. Let's take a quick look at the hardware of the HTC Cha-Cha or Status first. The phone as a whole is built out of a fusion between polycarbonate plastics in addition to aluminum wrapping around the frame. For a low-cost device, HTC continues the tradition of building quality hardware, and it shows here. It feels really nice in the hand, and the slight curves on the edges of the keyboard makes typing an even better experience. The keys themselves are nicely domed, they're tactile, responsive, backlit under low-light environments, and they also have this nice clicky feel to them. It's easily one of the better keyboards I've seen from a non-BlackBerry device. The very top of the device features access to a 3.3 megapixel front-facing camera, which is pretty good as far as doing some quick video calls are concerned. The screen itself, although it's fairly small, again at 2.6 inches, offers a decent 221 pixels per inch, and it's fairly bright, vibrant, and saturated and offers good viewing angles, so not too many complaints there. What I don't love about the design is the placement of a dedicated talk and end key that takes up an entire row on the keyboard. I wish they could have put a trackpad or a trackball on the center for more precise navigation if you didn't want to use the touchscreen. Otherwise, they maybe could have gotten rid of these keys completely and just put on a larger display and have these be virtual keys once you need to actually place a call. So that's something to keep in mind. The very top also features a loudspeaker, or the earpiece I should say, and it's actually pretty loud and sounds good. The side features access to a volume rocker, which is also very nicely placed and designed. There's a micro USB port for charging. It takes about 2.5 hours to completely charge this handset, and afterwards the 1250 milliamp hour capacity battery will last you for about 2 days before you need to recharge it again, just because the screen doesn't take that much power, and although there's both Wi-Fi and GPS in addition to Bluetooth, it only sports a single-core 800 megahertz processor with 512 megabytes of RAM, so it also doesn't drain that much power as far as doing too many crazy tasks and running games. You're not going to be doing that, so that obviously makes the battery last quite a bit longer. The top features access to a physical power key, which is nicely placed. It's really easy to tap on because the phone isn't too tall, and there's also a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack. On the very back, there's access to the loudspeaker, a 5 megapixel autofocus enabled camera with LED flash, and a removable back cover, which you can access the micro SD card slot, full-size SIM card slot, and the removable battery. So if we take a closer look at the interface next, we'll see that we are greeted to a very traditional HTC Sense experience on top of Android 2.3.3. Again, this is about 5 years old now, so obviously some of the age is starting to show. With that being said, the interface is still fairly clean and it's responsive as well as snappy and easy to use for the most part. Whenever you're connected to the internet, either using Wi-Fi or 3G connectivity, the clock icon automatically updates with weather, time, and date information. You can see here that it's still being called the Market as opposed to being called the Play Store. So again, some signs of age are starting to creep through, but otherwise the experience remains snappy. You can pinch out to look at all of the open screens, create new screens, as well as tap here to look at all your applications in one consolidated folder. So let's start with taking a closer look at the camera first. It's a 5 megapixel shooter, and because the phone comes with very limited 512 megabytes of built-in flash storage, it does require that you pop in a SD card before you take too many images or videos. Otherwise, the interface is classic HDC. It's clean, it's easy to use, and for a 5 megapixel shooter, it does a pretty good job, although focusing takes a few seconds to complete. Otherwise, it's a very good camera at such a low cost, especially on a more budget or messaging-centric smartphone, and it certainly will suffice for posting some quick snaps onto Facebook, Twitter, MySpace, and the like. Again, you can see the icon start to glow a few times, which means I can directly tap on this to post the image onto my Facebook wall. So here I can zoom in and out of an image. I can also take an image. I can transition into the front camera. I can start recording video. I can do autofocus, turn on the flash, and of course look at my gallery of videos. So all in all, really not bad. And you can see other apps are typical for the age of the handset, and they include access to the music player. There's navigation from Google that uses the GPS sensor, news and weather updates. HTC has some of their own things on here like Peep, the phone dialer pad, which you can access just by tapping on once. If you tap on calls as well, you can also group these, look at your contacts, and again, HTC has implemented Sense, where all the sliding goes on the right-hand edge of the device for the most part, which makes it actually really easy to use and easy to access, even if you're just tapping on things with one hand. It's pretty clever, and there's also arrow keys on the very bottom of the keyboard, which you can use to navigate. Utility apps include Google Talk, which lets you make phone calls using Wi-Fi and not your data plan. There's also transferring data between devices, a video player, which supports most popular codecs without any problems for offline video watching, a digital voice recorder that uses a pretty good active noise canceling microphone on here to record some sound for meetings and the like, a automatic voice search, but it's not a smart assistant as we'd like to know it today. There's also a weather app in addition to Wi-Fi hotspot from using your phone as a router, and there's also a optimized YouTube app, which still works quite well and allows you to really easily still watch YouTube videos on the device, even though the screen isn't huge. In fact, I'm going to do a quick test of the optimized browser right now just by tapping on OS reviews, and you can see how the keyboard is just super responsive, and I make very few errors when typing on it. Again, it's one of the best parts of this phone, just how great that keyboard experience is, and videos can be loaded in full HD 720p as well. You can see that they load almost instantly, which is really impressive for a phone that's almost over 5 years old, and it still remains so snappy in some basic tasks like this, despite a single core processor that isn't even 1 gigahertz. Again, the sound on here is really loud and clean sounding, although it doesn't pack too much of a bass, lower frequencies, but it still is a very adequate music listening experience. Now you can kind of see where some of the apps aren't exactly optimized for this portrait style 2.6-inch display. So if you actually rotate it, you can see how they tend to reload and orient themselves, and everything works. But again, you can tell how small the display is once you really rotate it, and this is kind of on par with the size of a HP Veer, if you guys remember that device. So definitely a smaller touchscreen experience. So if you are planning to get this just for the purpose of watching videos and browsing the web, not the greatest, just because the screen size is a little limited. So anyways, videos are completely still viewable and watchable, and in terms of installing apps, most of them will work. The Play Store is going to prompt you, saying your phone does not support the latest version of this app. Do you want to install, the version that the phone supports? You can tap on yes, and a lot of times it will still work. So you still get a fairly wide selection of apps. Most of the ones that you would want to use can still be done on here. Although for extensive gaming, as well as really power hungry, CPU hungry, demanding titles are probably not going to be the best idea just because of the limited RAM in addition to the limited processing package. So if we take a look at the HTC browser that's built on here, it's also fairly classic and typical of its time. You can see that mobile pages will still load up fairly respectively, but they definitely take a few seconds longer. And since it's not optimized like the YouTube client is, things aren't going to be nearly as snappy, although you can still load the full desktop version. Although it's struggling a little bit, you can see how even complex sites like the New York Times, which is known as a benchmark for most smartphone browsers, will still render correctly on the HTC statuses display. You can see that text isn't super legible unless you zoom all the way in, but most of the elements, including the flashed content in addition to the interactive parts. Videos, text are still fully loaded, and of course you can indeed pinch to zoom, and it will be a little smoother once the page completely loads, but you can really tell here how it's actually really a usable and surprisingly decent experience, which I found to be quite surprising because most other retro devices from 2011 that I pick up now are no longer capable of even, let's say, loading this page at all. And the fact that the HTC Status doesn't even have a 1 gigahertz processor, but really still stands up to the test of time, obviously not as a flagship device, but as a mid-end entry-level device, it's still quite surprising. Would I still recommend this phone here in 2017? I would probably say not really, at least not for everyone. If you're looking for a good messaging phone, I would say this is still a decent option. It's got quite a few smart features stacked in. There's Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, along with a pretty sensitive touchscreen display and a nice skin on top of Android. It's definitely not for power-hungry, app users, not for gamers or people super invested into media 24/7. But if you love Facebook, this Facebook feature still works, and it's a super tightly integrated device that also presents a very usable experience. Phone quality is excellent, the keyboard is excellent, the speakers and camera are all very good for this price point, especially if you can find one now for, let's say, under $40. It makes for a pretty compelling value as an entry-level or a backup device. You can learn more information about the HTC Status or the HTC Cha-Cha in our official retro throwback article, but for now this has been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews.